Hook. That night, 2:14 a.m. The first time I noticed him, the city felt like it had been turned down to a low hum, as if someone had placed a heavy palm over Seattle and told it to hush. A siren smeared itself across Capitol Hill, distant enough to sound like a broken violin. Rain feathered against my window, a soft finger drumming that made the glass breathe with fog. I stood barefoot on the cool hardwood and reached for the chain on my blinds. The square of light across the narrow street was already waiting for me. 4th floor, 2 windows from the left, a rectangle of pale gold, a simple stage. At its center, a shape like a person, unmoving. A shoulder, a head, the hint of fingers braced on the sill. I told myself it was a coat rack, a shadow, a floor lamp with a hat thrown over it. I leaned closer, felt the window's chill kiss my skin, tasted the dry, metallic tang of fear at the back of my throat. The silhouette did not sway with a draft. It did not flicker with the light. It watched. I raised my phone to the glass and tried to capture the distance, wet reflections, streetlight halos, my own faint outline layered over the city like a ghost that didn't know where to haunt. I tapped the screen to force a focus, a bead of blue-white from the crosswalk blinking at the corner. The camera hesitated. When the shutter finally clicked, the shape melted. The light snapped off instantly as if a finger had found a switch precisely when mine found the photo. The apartment opposite became a mirror that threw me back at myself, a woman in an oversized sweatshirt, hair like a curtain, eyes too wide. Steam curled from the mug I'd left on the windowsill. It smelled like cinnamon, but the comfort in that scent felt counterfeit now, like a story I'd told to myself to keep myself asleep. I dropped the chain. The blinds rasped down, slats closing with insect clicks. On the other side of the glass, rain redoubled, an applause I hadn't earned. I backed into the dark, the apartment shrinking around me, every object suddenly assigned a second job. Bed as stage, lamp as spotlight, window as mouth. My phone vibrated, a notification on a dark screen, my name floating like a dare. Unknown number. Do that again. And what exactly did he want me to do again?
Backstory. 7 days earlier, 9:10 p.m. My name is Maya, 29, junior architect who drafts other people's certainty for a living. I spend my days in a warehouse office that smells like dry paper and warmed aluminum, the kind of place where the printers have moods and the coffee machine hisses like a cornered animal. My world is lines. Load-bearing, dotted, hidden. I draw routes for water, fire, light, calculations that insist on order, even when life declines to provide it. I moved into my 4th floor studio on Pine Street in late spring, when the trees along the sidewalk were just starting to whisper and the farmer's market made the air sweet with berries. The apartment is a rectangle with a stubborn personality, a stubborn radiator that bangs like someone trying to be let in, stubborn windows that sweat when it rains, a stubborn mirror screwed to the closet door that seems to take too much pleasure in catching me off guard. The floors creak where they want, not where you think they will. The kitchen is a strip of stainless steel pretending to be a room. The view is an alley and the building across, a face perpetually close enough to kiss. I am meticulous, almost to a fault. I label jars, I fold dish towels like blueprints, I lock the door 3 times in a pattern that feels like a prayer someone else wrote, and I tap the deadbolt once for good measure, listening for that solid, satisfying click in the frame. I live alone. I like it. I have friends, but I treat solitude like an object I can place exactly where I want it, adjusting it by degrees. I used to live with a man named Dylan, a musician who loved nights and left them only reluctantly. He filled our old apartment with sound, even when he meant to be quiet, his guitar line echoing inside glasses and picture frames. I loved him enough to think the chaos was a different kind of order. He loved me enough to call that belief romantic. When he moved to Los Angeles to chase something large and bright, he wanted me to be a satellite. I said no. There was no scene, no smashed plates, Just a long hug in a doorway and the smell of his cedar oil on my sweater for weeks afterward. We still text sometimes, like divers tapping the side of a tank to prove they can still breathe. In the new building, there's Mrs. Delgado on the second floor, who keeps a spray of fake lavender by her door because the real stuff makes her sneeze. She bakes muffins that taste like applause and reassures the rest of us that everything will work out if we just look both ways. There's the building manager, Steve, who has a key ring the size of a small galaxy and a habit of cracking his knuckles in tense bursts. There's a bike courier named Evan, who propels himself up the stairs when the elevator sulks, mint gum sharp on his breath like the promise of cold. Nights in the studio had a rhythm. Work till the drawing stopped making sense, jog down to the deli that calls everyone boss, press a palm to the window to check the weather before committing to a coat. I cleaned the counter until it squeaked. I watered the pothos on the shelf and cooed at it like a pet, the stems a tangle of green punctuation. I streamed documentaries with low narration so the apartment wouldn't feel like it had swallowed its own tongue. I slept with the blinds half open because the city's light made me feel watched in a good way, like the anonymous kindness of being one of many. I considered myself practical. I considered myself careful. I considered myself the main character of a quiet life, even if that sentence embarrassed me. And yet, on that night, a week ago, as I rinsed a plate and listened to the rain begin again with its soft insistence, I didn't consider how easily a window could become an introduction. Because what good is a blueprint if the person who reads it wants to build a door where none should exist?
Inciting incident. 3 nights later, 1:47 a.m. The text arrived at 1:47 a.m., the hour when infomercials still believe in miracles and the city forgets the names of the cars it left huddled at the curbs. I had lingered at my drafting table, the desk lamp casting a buttery circle that made the rest of the studio look like it was holding its breath. I'd drawn and erased the same stare for an hour. The radiator ticked like a smug metronome. I told myself I was awake because of ambition, not because something in the walls had changed the temperature of the air. Unknown number, nice sweatshirt. A second later, a photo arrived. The image was grainy but decisive. Me, in my apartment, from behind. My hair piled into a hasty knot, my shoulders hunched over the drawings, the hem of my gray sweatshirt lifting enough to expose a strip of skin above my waistband. The lamp flare had turned the paper into a blank rectangle, as if I had been laboring over light itself. In the background, the rectangle of my window glowed with street reflections, slick, painterly smears. The angle was slightly high, looking down on me. I did not breathe for 3 full seconds. The last heartbeat I remembered belonged to someone else. I turned in a circle on the spot without meaning to, searching for a camera with my eyes because to search with my hands felt like making it real. I crouched to peer beneath the drafting table, my palm pressing into dust and lost paper clips. I checked the lamp base, the smoke detector, the black eye of the microwave door. I stood on the chair to look along the top lip of the shelves where the pothos spilled its long, glossy trails, green against gray. The apartment watched me back, blankly, as if waiting for an instruction. I texted back, fingers refusing to obey until I forced them to. Who is this? 3 blinking dots appeared, flirted with a response, then vanished. I thought of calling 911. I thought of calling Dylan. I thought of knocking on Mrs. Delgado's door and waking her sweetness into fear. Instead, I called the number because fear has a straightforward button and I pressed it. It rang once, twice. The call clicked to end with a sound like a door closing just out of reach. I dimmed the lamp and slid along the wall to the window. I stayed to the side like the movies tell you to, as if bullets are a thing that glass will volunteer to invite in. The blinds were half lowered. I peered through the V-shaped slats made by my fingers. 4th floor, 2 windows from the left. A rectangle of pale gold. The shape was there. Not a coat rack, not a trick. Motionless, attentive, patient. My breath fogged at the glass, which meant I was too close. The radiator ticked once, decisively, as if it had reached a conclusion before I had. The next text arrived,
Smile. How do you hold your face still when the world around it is trying to move you?
Rising suspicion. The following evening, 8:03 p.m. Daylight did its best to make the world honest. I lugged myself through work with a focus so aggressive it felt like a performance. My office mate, Priya, pushed a granola bar into my hand and said I looked like an eclipse. The printer ate a sheet of elevations and then belched them out with teeth marks. Every time I looked at a line, I saw a window. I changed the lock pattern on my door, 3 clicks, a pause, 2 more. Like a new spell could intimidate the same demons. I kept the chain on while I showered and set my phone on the sink, watching the timer like a guard watching a gate. Steam turned the bathroom mirror into white noise. When I wiped it with my palm, a handprint bloomed and then vanished so fast it made me dizzy. At 6:40 p.m., I dropped a note in the building's group chat. Anyone else notice someone across the way keeping weird hours? The replies came in quick little bursts. The guy in the gray hoodie? The one with plants and the orange cat? It's just a window. Mind your own view, girl. Steve, the manager, sent a thumbs up emoji, the digital equivalent of a shrug. I walked the hallway. Old carpet, new stains. On the landing between the 3rd and 4th floors, a window looked into the alley, raindrops dragging slow commas down the pane. A different angle. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass and tried to match the perspective in the photo. Too low. Back inside, I pulled the apartment apart, politely. I unscrewed the smoke detector. I ran my finger around the picture frame's edge and found nothing but dust and the fleeting intimacy of my own reflection. I lifted the plant, checked under the saucer, and spilled a 1/4 teaspoon of water that streaked across the wood like a tear. I stood on the chair again and felt it wobble beneath my feet, the small lurch of gravity reminding me I was still convincingly physical. I examined the light bulb above my head and had a thought so sudden and vivid it made my thighs tremble. Someone had been inside. I didn't own a ladder. I didn't own a second set of keys. The superintendent did. I texted Steve. Did anyone do maintenance in 4D this week? Steve. Not that I know of. Everything good? I typed yes and erased it. Just saw something weird. 3 dots. A minute later, probably just a reflection. Happens all the time. Reflection. As if my fear were light misbehaving. I made tea I didn't drink. I set my drafting lamp to the lowest setting and sat cross-legged on the bed, facing the window, like a believer facing an altar. I listened to the building sounds, the neighbor above dragging a chair, the elevator exhaling, footsteps in the hall with the soft weight of a person who wanted to be less noticeable than they were. Mint threaded the air, sharp and clean. It took me a second to realize why I recognized it. Evan's gum. The handle on my door ticked, as if it were cooling down, metal adjusting to the air. But then it ticked again, deliberate, testing. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing but the fish eye of a beige hall. My heart skittered out of sequence, a drummer who forgot the song. Across the street, the light came on. I snapped the blinds closed and taped their cord to the wall like someone securing a bandage. I told myself to sleep. The radiator laughed inside the pipes. I lay on the bed and felt the mattress remember the shape of my insomnia. At 2:14 a.m., like a train passing on schedule, a sliver of light bled through the blind's edges. It found the floor, determined, and began its slow crawl towards the closet. The unknown number did not text again. The silence between my phone and the window felt like 2 strangers refusing to admit they were on the same team. I got up, and for the first time since moving in, I locked my bathroom door while I brushed my teeth. How do you barricade a mirror? First twist, 2 days later, 11:35 p.m. The first clue revealed itself not as a thing, but as a timing. I had learned the watcher's rhythm. Light on around 2, light off at the click of my camera, light on again when my body believed in sleep enough to be vulnerable. I set up my own counter-rhythm. If I couldn't stop being prey, I could be a biologist. I propped my phone in the bookshelf with the camera peeking between spines. I downloaded a motion trigger app and told it to earn the name of my dread. I turned my lamp toward the wall to flatten the shadows. I pulled on a hoodie and tugged the hood up so my hair wouldn't become a landmark.
I sat at the drafting table, but I didn't sketch. I listened. The radiator calmed. The building's belly gurgled once as if digesting. An hour stretched and thinned. At 12:13 a.m., the app clicked and captured a photo. Not of the window across from me, but of my hallway. A shadow passing the inch of space at the base of my door, vague as fog and just as undeniable. I froze, every muscle holding a breath. The shadow moved on. I texted Steve, "Hey, someone's in the hall." He responded quickly for a man who often made excuses slow enough to nap on. "Evan just brought up a wrong delivery and is heading down. All good." Evan. Mint gum, calves like ropes, a hello that always landed just a little too close. I imagined him jogging past my door, the soft thump of sneakers I hadn't actually heard. I imagined him glancing at my peephole, exactly the way I had. At 1:58 a.m., the across-the-street light blinked on. I raised my phone, not to point at the window, but to point at myself. I flipped to the front-facing camera and, using the reflection in the glass as a guide, aimed the rear camera toward the closet mirror. I took a picture. In the instant before the shutter, I saw myself, the hooded outline, the lamp glow like a pale halo, the blinds a flat gray. In the photograph itself, behind me, in the mirror, I saw the far corner of my room, an angle I never typically saw unless I turned around. On the ceiling, almost invisible against a textured white, was the eye of a small camera, no larger than a thumbnail. If not for a single pinprick LED that had failed to be fully dark, I might have missed it. Everything inside me moved at once, my stomach, my breath, the little bones in my ears. An impulse to run collided with the fact that the only door out was the same door I suddenly couldn't trust. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. I tasted dust and something chemical, the leftover ghost of a cleaning product I hadn't used. I dragged the chair beneath the spot and climbed, pressed my palm to the ceiling for balance, then peered close. The camera was a pearl embedded where corner met crown molding, a parasite that had learned politeness. The wire snaked inside the wall where I couldn't reach it. The adhesive under the housing smelled faintly like citrus and plastic. I pried it off. It resisted, then gave with a sticky sigh, like lifting a bandage too slowly. I wrapped it in a dish towel and put it in the freezer, an instinct stolen from some blog about stopping electronics from transmitting. Magic wrapped in terry cloth. Across the street, the light went out. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Unknown number. That was rude. If rudeness could save me, how rude was I willing to be?
Escalation. The next 48 hours. I did everything wrong and everything right in a sequence that felt like a coin flipping so fast it became a blur. I called the police. The officer on the phone had a voice like a late-shift diner, tired but still open. I described the camera, the photos, the texts. He asked if I was in immediate danger. I said I didn't know how to quantify the word immediate. He gave me a case number that tasted like cardboard in my mouth and told me to save everything. He suggested closing my blinds fully at night. The way he said it was kind, but the words made me feel like an idiot for having loved the glow of a city enough to leave a sliver of it inside. I talked to Steve in person at noon, when the hallway smelled like laundry and someone's experimental soup. He jingled his keyring as if to remind both of us who could open doors. His eyebrows climbed when he saw the camera, then rearranged themselves into skepticism. "You sure this was in your ceiling?" he asked, as if I'd found it at a yard sale and wanted a story to go with it. He took it with 2 fingers like it might smear him and promised to look into it. The phrase felt like an inside-out joke. I watched his hands. His thumbnail had a crescent of motor oil under it. When he slipped the camera into his pocket, I cataloged the pocket. Left jacket, outer layer, zipper missing its pull tab. I bought simple window alarms at a hardware store where the aisles smelled like mulch and new beginnings. The clerk wanted to talk about weather, so I pretended to care about clouds while my palms sweated against cardboard packaging. Back home, I stuck the alarms to my fire escape window, to the bathroom, to the little pane above the kitchen sink no one but a cat could fit through. I tested each one, the siren plastic loud, a toy pretending to be a weapon. The sound vibrated in my teeth long after it stopped. I bought a second lamp and put it on a timer to come on at 2:10 a.m. and go off at 2:30, then on again at 3 like a long wink. I taped a note over the peephole from the inside. If you're reading this, go away. Because the idea of someone's eye pressed to that little glass made my skull knot. I set a glass bottle on the door handle, balanced so that any touch would send it to the floor. I slept in sweatpants with my keys in the pocket, metal heavy against my thigh like a promise. Every sound became specific. The elevator's groan lost its anonymity. Footsteps separated into categories: confident, uncertain, performative. Twice I smelled mint at my door, and twice the hall was empty by the time I looked. A package arrived that I hadn't ordered, a bulk box of batteries sized perfectly for the alarms I just bought, no return address. I carried it straight to the dumpster, then fished it back out because throwing away useful power felt like cowering in public. I told Priya at work. Her eyes sharpened like a camera finding focus, then softened like someone opening a window into a second room. "Come stay with me," she said. I thanked her and didn't, because leaving meant losing my vantage point. She handed me a whistle with a lanyard, the cheap metal cool against my palm. "If you won't be loud, let the whistle do it for you." I tucked it into my hoodie pocket and tried not to hear how metaphorical that sounded. I watched the building across from me and played a bad game of telephone with myself. Light on, silhouette present. Light off, text message. Light on, silence. At 2:14 a.m., my lamp clicked to life all by itself, and even though I had set the timer, the small independence of the device startled me enough that the whistle knocked against my teeth. I angled a mirror next to the drafting table to see the door while facing the window. In the reflection, I caught my own eyes and almost didn't recognize them. They had become smaller, more concentrated, as if too much fear had evaporated the spare water around them. At 3:21 a.m., a photo arrived. The outside of my door, the note over the peephole legible, the bottle balanced on the handle like choreography. The caption, "Cute." I typed "stop" and sent it, a word that looked ridiculous once freed into the world without the context of my pulse. The reply came instantly. "Come see me," then, "2 windows from the left," then, "or look closer to home." The alarms didn't sound that night. The silence of their self-control was almost worse than noise. The next afternoon, while I was at work, the unknown number sent a video. My apartment, empty. The slow pan of my living room, the plant trailing from the shelf, the unmade bed, the note over the peephole, shot from just above eye level, smooth, like a camera on a small gimbal. The video ended with a close-up of the window, my blinds half open. I smelled the office's stale coffee and tasted adrenaline on my back molars, a bitterness that made me swallow twice. I left work mid-sentence and rode the bus home with my hand woven into my bag strap like a sailor into a rope. My door was locked. The bottle was undisturbed. Inside, nothing screamed of difference. The bed was measurably messy and precisely the way it had been. The alarms nodded back at me with their small red LEDs. The plant seemed amused. How does someone walk through a locked room without using the door?
Midpoint choice. That evening, 7:26 p.m. I sat on the floor with my back to the bed frame and held my keys like brass knuckles I hadn't earned. I had 2 options that weren't really options: leave and abandon the problem to someone else's eyesight, or stay and risk becoming the kind of story I read under blankets when I wanted to feel safely frightened. Both felt like surrender, one to absence and one to arrogance. I unrolled my drawings and spread them on the floor. Elevations of a community center, a stair section detailed down to the last bolt, a plan that told water where to kneel and where to run. I pulled out a fresh sheet and started sketching my apartment like a crime scene. Door, windows, fire escape, shared walls, ceiling cavity. I shaded the hall where the shadow had passed and penciled in a question mark over the closet where the mirror caught angles the room shouldn't offer. I noted the landing window between floors. I drew the building across the alley and its 4th-floor window like a square eye that refused to blink. If I stayed, I had to commit. Staying halfway was just an invitation written in polite cursive.
I texted Priya, "Holding down the fort tonight. We'll call at 9 and 11. If I don't, call me." She responded with 3 knife emojis and a heart, which made me laugh in a small, high-pitched way that made me feel 13. I texted Dylan too, a message so neutral it felt like I was talking to a coworker. "Weird week. Rain and deadlines. You good?" He replied with a photo of a rehearsal room and a joke about people who tune guitars instead of relationships. The normalcy was either merciful or obscene. Around sunset, I made the choice. I took the bottle off the door handle, I opened the blinds, I turned on both lamps and dragged the drafting table 6 inches toward the window so my silhouette would land where it had in the first photo. I set my phone to record on the shelf again, but this time I also placed a small mirror on the floor by the door, angled so I'd see shadows before they reached me. I put the whistle on a string around my neck. I placed my heaviest flashlight within reach. I cracked the fire escape window by 1/8 of an inch and wedged a folded receipt in the gap so I could tell if it had changed. I would let him watch. I would also watch him watch. The clock on my stove ticked toward 8 in bright blue digits. I heated soup and ate it standing because sitting felt like letting my ribs stay in one place. The soup tasted like salt and resolve. The hallway stayed quiet. The alley pooled darkness between the buildings until the first car turned into it, headlights like 2 coins sliding along the wet. I whispered to the apartment because talking to myself suddenly made sense. I will not be prey. My voice was steadier than I had anticipated. The radiator answered with a small, approving sigh. If baiting a trap is a sin, what do you call it when the person you're baiting believes the trap is love?
Unraveling and second twist. After midnight, 12:22 to 2:16 a.m. At 12:22 a.m., the unknown number sent coordinates, not GPS, but the kind an architect recognizes instinctively. 4D, wall A, 7 feet from corner, 8 inches below crown, the exact location where I had found the camera. I didn't reply. At 12:41, a notification from my Motion app, movement near the closet. I watched the playback, my own reflection, delayed. My own body a fraction behind my own movement, ghosting like a bad memory. I filed that away because I refused to be gaslit by glass. At 1:30, the hall groaned, a sound like a cautious foot searching for a creek that won't gossip. The mirror wedge showed a slice of shadow. Not tall, a hesitation at the base of the door. The bottle would have shattered then if I'd left it. The shadow pooled for a second and then drew itself tall again, a person reminding themselves how to be a person. Mint rode the air. My heart did the stutter step that had learned this week. Then the shadow moved on. At 2:58, the rectangle of gold across the alley snapped on. I turned off my lamp and left the blinds open. My apartment became a bowl, and light poured in from across the way, shallow and obscene. The shape stood at the window, as consistent as a logo. I picked up my phone and zoomed, but grain devoured clarity. The silhouette's head tilted a degree, like surprise. Or recognition. I thought of Steve's keyring. I thought of Evan's calves taking the stairs 2 at a time. I thought of the video shot inside my apartment when I wasn't home. I thought of the fact that none of this was a ghost, that everything real smelled like something. Citrus adhesive, mint gum, old carpet, wet metal, fear. I stepped sideways, closer to the closet mirror. My angle in the glass changed, the room with it. That's when the second twist arrived. Not with a bang, but with a diagram snapping into place. The photos and videos someone had sent were from an angle slightly higher than a person's eye, slightly lower than the ceiling camera. Stable, smooth. In the mirror's reflection, in the closet's top track, a tiny circle winked at me. Another lens, smaller than a raisin, nestled deep in the aluminum where the sliding door rolled. It had been looking into the mirror, using the mirror to widen its gaze. If I faced the mirror, I was trapped twice, by my own reflection and by the eye that had hijacked it.
You can move a mirror with your body. You cannot move a lens by pretending you aren't there. I slid the closet door with 2 fingers, slow enough not to squeal the track. I lifted the door a 1/4 inch and ran my nail along the groove until it clicked against plastic. The camera was wired, a hair-thin snake disappearing into the jam. I pressed the whistle between my teeth like a coin and pulled. Adhesive stretched, resisted, then snapped with a tiny sound that felt too loud. The alarms didn't howl. The building didn't answer. The lens came away with a curl of aluminum paint attached, as if it had taken a souvenir. I dropped it into my soup bowl, the one I hadn't washed, and watched it sink into a shallow puddle of broth like a drowning insect. Across the alley, the light went off. Immediately, my phone lit up. "You're learning." My skin prickled so fast it felt like static, like I had rubbed my entire body with a balloon. I typed without thinking, "Who are you?" The reply took longer this time, as if the answer required calibration. "Look both ways." The phrase pitched me sideways into a memory of Mrs. Delgado's muffins, the way she used that exact string of words to solve every problem, from rent increases to missing packages. My scalp tightened so hard it hurt. She had fake lavender by her door. She couldn't bear the sneeze from the real. She was sweet, but sweet people can be used as alibis by monsters because kindness is such a convenient uniform. I opened my door and stood in the hall. Yellow light, cracked paint, the pattern in the carpet like a misprinted map. As I looked down toward the stairwell window, I saw that the landing light was off. Unusual, because maintenance kept it on a timer. I held my breath and heard the softest smear of a shoe against stair rubber. A person misjudging a step because they were dividing their attention between their feet and the thing they held in their hands. I slipped back into my apartment and put my eye to the peephole. The hall remained a beige river. I waited. The mint smell rose, then receded, like someone pacing and rethinking. The thought hit me with the precise satisfaction of a correct measurement. The person taunting me lived here, or held the keys to mimic living here. They moved like they owned the interval between my breaths. At 2:14 a.m., my timer lamp clicked on. At the exact same moment, a faint scratching came from the fire escape window. I turned my head and saw the folded receipt lift and flutter like a white flag, deciding whether to surrender. The wedge slid free and dropped to the floor. The window latch moved. If you want to meet a person who believes they're invisible, you have to stand very still where they expect you to be, and then decide not to be there at the last possible second. How much stillness does fear owe courage?
Climax: the storm on the roof.
I didn't think. I moved. The window latch began to rise. Slow, a hunter's careful kindness. I grabbed the heavy flashlight, crossed the room in 3 quiet steps, and slammed the latch down from the inside, slapping the glass so hard my hand stung. The person on the other side jerked the sash upward anyway, strength against mechanism, and managed a 2-inch gap before the alarm found its voice. The scream of plastic siren filled the apartment, a strobing howl in sound. The gap in the window widened, a hand pushed in, gloved, black fabric slick with rain, and then a forearm. I brought the flashlight down on the wrist, hard. The thud traveled up my arm and into my shoulder, bone to bone. The hand snapped back out of view. A low grunt leaked into the room, male, breath tighter than pain should allow. I blew the whistle, the shriek of it slicing the alarm's wail into ribbons. I pictured the sound pushing into walls, under doors, down halls, into sleeping ears, across the alley, into that 4th-floor window that had been a stage for my fear. I pictured the sound choosing to be a friend. The forearm returned, angrier. The hand found the latch and tried again. I slammed it again. The window stuttered like a heartbeat that had learned a new, bad beat. The person made a decision, The pressure vanished. The alarm kept screaming. I counted 3, 4, 5 breaths. The footsteps I heard next weren't on the fire escape. They were in the hall. I spun and ran for the door, yanked the chain off, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled. The door resisted, suction from fear and habit, then gave way. The hall rushed at me in beige. At the far end, a figure flashed into view and then away toward the stairs. Dark hoodie, dark pants, a bulk I recognized from a dozen passing nods. Evan, the career, the calves. Mint snapped in the air like a breaking twig. "Hey!" I yelled, the word a ridiculous pellet fired at a bear. I followed. My bare feet slapped the carpet. The whistle bounced against my chest, cold. I hit the stairs and took them 2, nearly 3 at a time. The landing window was black. The smear of the city beyond it felt like a threat and a promise. Evan pushed through the door to the roof. I knew the door because Steve had shown it to all of us at move-in, the place to go during a fire if we were cornered, the metal cold and reluctant. I slammed my shoulder into it and stumbled out into a slap of wet wind. The roof smelled like tar and rain, so fresh it almost felt clean. The city spread out beyond the low wall as if it had rehearsed this entrance. Evan stood near the edge, hood up, chest heaving. He held something black and small in his right hand, a camera or a phone or a remote. He turned his face enough for the wind to catch the hood, and I saw him properly, a man whose friendly nod in daylight had disguised how efficiently he could subtract the space around him at night. "Stop," I said, because I had to start somewhere. I raised the flashlight. My wrist throbbed in tight pulses. "You like being seen," he said, voice low enough the storm almost ate it. "You leave the show on every night." "I like being part of a city," I said, my teeth knocked once against each other from the cold. "That's not an invitation." "You smiled at me," he said, as if that were a contract. "You always look. People who look are looking for something." "I looked because you were there." My mouth tasted like battery. "Get away from my window." He lifted the black object. Yes, a tiny camera, lens like a seed, and smiled like he was letting me in on an artist's secret. "Angles," he said. "Light. Framing. You make it beautiful." Fury arrived in a clean line through the fog of fear. "You broke into my home," I said, each word heavy with law. "Your manager asked me to keep an eye on things after the break-ins, said I had keys anyway, said it would make the residents feel safe." He tilted his head. "Do you feel safe?" "Steve." Keys like a galaxy, knuckles cracking like small announcements. The bottom fell out of the roof for a second, and the city tilted, and I had to flex my toes to grip the wet. "You asked me to watch the hall," I said, "not me in my bed." He shrugged, less elegant. "People are doors. Doors lead somewhere." Sirens began to bloom in the distance, a sound that finds its own way up walls. Somewhere, a neighbor had woken and used their phone as the thing it was invented to be. The sirens cut the air into a tension. He flicked his wrist. The camera skittered across the roof toward the drain like a black beetle. He stepped sideways toward the low wall. "You can tell them whatever you want," he said. "The video is yours now." He put one sneaker on the lip of the wall. I moved, without planning to, closing the distance enough to feel the heat of him under the wet. "Don't," I said. "Don't do anything dramatic. Let the police come. Let them write this part." He smiled in a way that removed all the light from his face. "Dramatic is why you left the blinds open." He shifted his weight. His sneaker slipped on the slick concrete. For a second, everything became excruciatingly slow. The way his heel tried to grip, the way his arms pinwheeled, the way the storm leaned in as if to hear him better. I didn't think. I threw the flashlight aside and grabbed his sleeve. Fabric screamed. He twisted, not to right himself, but to free himself from me. The choice was so strange that it slowed me down further. He pulled. The fabric tore. He fell toward the edge and then into it. My stomach fell with him and then snapped back like a rope catching a heavy thing. He didn't go over. He ricocheted off the wall, slammed a hip on the parapet, and went down hard onto the roof. The wind knocked out of him in a moan shaped like the word "oh." The sirens grew louder, large enough to stand on. I stepped back, the taste of iron in my mouth now indisputable. Rain plastered my hair to my cheek. I fought the urge to apologize to the air for existing near the edge of a man's story. The roof door banged open behind me. 2 officers stepped into the storm, jackets shining with beads of water like fish scales. I lifted both hands without being asked. The whistle at my throat clinked against my collarbone. Evan lay on his side, hands curled in toward his center as if holding a secret against the weather. "That's him," I said. My voice sounded like it had traveled a long way to find me. "He's been in my apartment." And if the city was listening, I wanted it to hear that sentence and memorize it.
Resolution. 45 days later. The city kept going. That's what cities do. The farmer's market turned from berries to apples. The light changed angles and discovered new surfaces to flatter. My apartment acquired a new lock, a cylinder that clicked into place with the satisfying heaviness of a safe, and a small camera of my own pointed at the door, sending footage to my phone like a friend who was always awake. The alarms stayed, not because they were powerful, but because they were loyal. Steve resigned under a sheen of regret that smelled like liability. He sent an email that used the phrase "unforeseen consequences" and reminded everyone of the ongoing commitment to safety. He included muffins from a bakery that probably charged extra for sincerity. The replacements changed more than they said they would. The landing light now stayed on so consistently it felt like a new oath. Evan was charged with trespassing, unlawful surveillance, and stalking. His lawyer tried to pull the lens wide to show a courier whose job was to enter buildings and a manager who cracked doors wider with a ring of cooperation. The court narrowed the frame again. He took a plea. He did not look at me when I read my statement, a string of factual sentences that tried very hard not to break into anything purple or pleading. In the hallway outside the courtroom, I leaned against cool tile and breathed for the first time since the roof. Air went all the way down. It smelled like disinfectant and a perfume I couldn't name. Priya slept on my pull-out couch for a week, then 2. The 2 of us moving like roommates who had learned one another's choreography. I avoided saying "we" even in my head, as if the word itself had too much shine for the truth of what my life needed to be for a while. I took showers with the bathroom door ajar and the mirror turned toward the wall. I ate soup at the table and tasted actual vegetables, not just salt and resolve. I worked. I drew. The lines behaved. A locksmith named Tasha told me about forced entry patterns while she tightened the plate on my strike box. She said, "Doors are honest. It's people you have to watch." I tipped her too much, and she let me. Mercy disguised as commerce.
I walked the neighborhood at dusk and reclaimed the way rain sounds when it isn't talking about breaking and entering. Streetlights turned puddles into small galaxies. The deli called me boss again, and I didn't find it funny. I found it anchoring, as if the word could be a local myth that made us all braver. I left the blinds closed for a while. One night, I left them open by an inch. The next week, 2. The opposite building did what buildings do best. It minded its own reflection. When a light lit up, it did so to tell a story I didn't need to star in. Sometimes, late, I saw a figure at a far window, someone undone by insomnia or a lover's argument or the wrong kind of late-night sandwich. I looked for a second and looked away. The cameras I owned recorded hours of nothing. I watched some of it like a hobby. Nothing is a gift. Nothing means the radiator ticks because heat has its own life, not because a stranger has learned the beat of your breath. Dylan sent a video of himself in a studio with new strings and old jokes. I recorded a reply of my plant unfurling a new leaf, and let the silence between them be the measure of what could survive distance. I wrote to Mrs. Delgado when she moved to be near her daughter, a note that thanked her for muffins and for a phrase that turned out to be a blueprint. Look both ways. I do now, but for myself. In the end, I stayed in the apartment on Pine Street, not because I won some war, but because I decided I didn't want my address to be a victory parade for a man who misunderstood windows. The city's hum raised itself back to where it had been before the hand in my window tried to teach me a second language for fear. Some nights, the siren smears itself across the hill just the same. Some nights, the rain drums its soft fingers on my glass. When the wind shifts, the alley smells like wet iron and baked bread, sweet and brutal, which feels correct for a place that holds so many private stories inside so many layers of public. And when a light turns on across the way, I let it. The light is none of my business until it is.
Reflection. 2 months later, Sunday, 5:02 p.m. I used to think windows were for looking out or letting in. I know now they're also for drawing a boundary you can actually see. A window is honest. A window tells you the rules. It will show you the city. It will show the city you. It will not tell you that a man is a camera or that a key ring means the same thing in every hand. That part is on me. I learned that fear is a layout you can sketch and then escape by adding a door you own. I learned that attention, given without consent, calls itself love because that's how it avoids indictment. I learned to add an alarm not because it will fight for me, but because it will scream beside me. I learned that saying stop is a complete sentence, even if it looks ridiculous on a screen. I learned to look both ways and then choose one on purpose. I learned that silence on a recording is proof of life, not emptiness. I learned that my hands can strike. I learned that my voice can carry. Mostly, I learned to count. 3 locks, 1 chain, 2 lamps, 1 whistle, infinite breaths. Pay attention to the breath you are on. It is the only one that can do anything. When I listen, I hear rain and the radiator and an old elevator being brave on tired cables. And underneath all of it, the small sound of a girl who decided not to be a stage. And if a stranger ever thinks a boundary is an invitation again, I know how to answer without opening anything at all.
I still live with the city's light on my floor, but it's my script now. And when the dark asks for an audience, I don't give it a seat.